Hey class, welcome to our science class. And our first section, our first thing that we're covering is weathering and erosion. And you should have received a copy of our weathering and erosion book from our packets that we gave out on Monday. Now, if you haven't got those, make sure you go to the school with your mom or have your parents, your guardian go and pick them up for you, because that's what we'll be covering. They will obviously be in these videos. They will be on the screen as I read along with you. But if you need help with doing the assignments, or if you need to refer back to them, it's good to have that copy. So make sure you get that picked up if you haven't yet. So now that we're starting, let's talk about our objectives for weathering erosion and things that we want you to be learning. We want you to learn the 4 main types of landforms. We want you to explore ways that rocks are broken down into smaller pieces, and also explore ways that rock pieces are transported to new locations. We want you to be able to describe ways that water and wind changes rocks and land. Also be able to describe the way that gravity has an impact on rocks and land. We're going to discuss some of the ways that human activities, us as humans, change the land. And the last thing is we want you to understand how we, the people, us humans, are restoring some land to its natural state. So during weathering erosion, you'll have some assignments for each section. You will have what's called checkpoints, and you'll notice it as we go through, and I'll point them out. Little checkpoints that will help you and myself know that you're understanding the material that we're covering. And those are just little short discussion posts that you'll answer, and those are all uploaded on Canvas, so you can click on those. And you can even do those while we're doing this lesson, or while you're listening to this lesson. And then we also have an apply science concept assignment that you'll be doing at the end of each section. So those are the assignments. And then also the last thing for the whole book is the vocabulary. So make sure you use the back of the book, the glossary, to fill out the vocabulary assignment. So let's do a little background of weathering and erosion. Weathering and erosion are the sculptors of Earth's constant changing landforms. If you think about a sculptor, an artist who cuts into, to marble, or uses clay to form, pottery. Weathering and erosion are the sculptors of Earth's constant changing landforms, from the smallest hill to the vast Grand Canyon. Some of the natural processes that change and shape landforms occur gradually and over millions of years. Other processes are very rapid and can occur in minutes. Earth's landforms are composed of soil, minerals, rocks, and other materials. Minerals are solid, non-living, natural occurring substances. Rocks are composed of minerals. Weathering is a process by which rocks and minerals are broken down into smaller pieces, called sediment. Water, wind, temperature changes, and living things all cause weathering. Erosion is the carrying away of sediment by water, wind, or gravity. For example, a river's rushing water can weather rock and erode loose sediment from the river banks. Over many years, the actions of rivers can carve out valleys and canyons. So, if you look behind me, there's a great picture of what weathering and erosion can do. So I'm going to take away my webcam really quick, and let's look at this picture. We can see how wind, and especially water, has impacted the way that these rocks and mountains are formed and have been formed. You can see that through here the water has, over time, kind of create this crazy kind of snake-like river. And so we're going to learn a lot about this process of weathering and erosion. So I'm excited to learn about this with you. So let's open our books and dive into our first section. And our first section is what are landforms? We're going to be covering pages 2 through 11 today. And so let's get started. So let's make a connection. The land's features or natural shapes differ from one region to another. Some areas have hills, mountains, and valleys. What are some features of the land in your area? Well, I think we have mountains around us, right? We got hills. We can see that humans have impacted the area. If you were to look at Route 66 kind of, but then especially I-40, and we'll learn about that later in weathering erosion, how humans impact that. This picture on the page reminds me of Virginia, where I was living before. A lot of colors in the fall in Virginia. Not so many colors here in Gallup, but Gallup has its own beauty. But this is like Virginia, rolling hills and older mountains that are smaller because of a lot of weathering and erosion taking place. So the mountains are smaller, they're older over there. All right, Earth's landforms. No matter where you live, the land around you has unique features. Some parts of the land might be low or flat, and others might be high or sloping. Earth's surface has a great variety of natural features or shapes called landforms. A landform can be as small as a few meters, tall or wide, or it can stretch for thousands of kilometers. Together, all the landforms in a particular region are known as that region's topography. And there are some of your first two vocabulary words for this. A mountain is a landform that is much higher than the surrounding land. A hill is also a raised area, but a hill is not as high as a mountain. The tops of some mountains are pointed, while the tops of other mountains are more rounded. A group or chain of mountains is known as a mountain range. The Rocky Mountains and the Appalachian Mountains are two major mountain ranges in North America. Now, which mountain range do we live in? We covered this in our maps section, so at the beginning of the year. Do you guys remember? Yeah, the Rocky Mountains. That's right. Great job. So valleys. A valley is a landform that lies between hills or mountains and is much lower than the surrounding land. Some valleys are V-shaped, while others are more U-shaped. The sides of a valley are called walls, and the bottom of the valley is called the floor. So deep, steep walled valleys are known as canyons. The Grand Canyon, located in Arizona, is one of the world's best known landforms. So if we look at these two pictures right here, the picture on the left shows a great picture of a mountain, and it's tall and pointy. This is Mount Everest in Asia, if we read the caption. And down here is kind of the valley, and right here is another picture of a valley. You have the mountains all around, and this river goes right through the valley, this low part. And we learn that this low, the bottom of the valley is called what? The floor. And the sides are called the walls of the valley. Let's learn about some more landforms. We got the plains. Some areas of Earth's surface are mostly flat and few hills or valleys. A wide flat landform is called a plain. Some plains are enormous, covering millions of square kilometers of Earth's surface. The Great Plains is a large flat area that covers much of the central United States and portions of Canada and Mexico. So traveling out here, I came from Virginia on the east coast, over here towards the west coast, but about the Midwest, right here in New Mexico, and I went through a lot of plains. Kansas, Nebraska has a lot of flat area. Other plains are much smaller. A floodplain, for example, is a flat area that stretches along the sides of a river. Here we got a picture of a plain. And then let's look at a plateau. What is a plateau? A plateau is a landform that is flat like a plain, but is higher than the surrounding land. Some plateaus are very large and can be thousands or even millions of square kilometers in size. The Colorado Plateau stretches across large portions of Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. Hey, maybe some of you guys have been there. Other plateaus are much smaller. A small plateau is called a mesa, which is the Spanish word for table. A small mesa with very steep sides is known as a, how would you say that? Looks like T. It's pronounced butte. Is known as a butte. Mesas and buttes are both common landforms in the southwestern United States. So here's a picture of a butte. A butte is a small mesa with very steep sides. This butte, located in Arizona, so close to us, is one of a group of buttes called the Mittens. All right, so right here is two of your assignments, right? So we have this checkpoint right here. This is what the checkpoints are. And that is explain what a landform is and name 4 types. So in Canvas, you can click on, it will be labeled Earth's Landforms Checkpoint. And it's a discussion post where you'll answer that. That will be the exact same thing that you do with the rest of the checkpoints with this book and our next 2 books for this quarter. All right, so just remember how to do that. It's just going to be a discussion post that you're going to answer. Okay, so let's go down to our next section, which is what are weathering and erosion, right? So we just have a few more pages and we're done for this lesson. So let's stay focused and continue to follow along. All right, make a connection. Double O Arch is just one of more than 2,000 natural sandstone arches found in Arches National Park in Utah. How do you suppose the arches formed? So looking at this picture on the screen, or looking at this picture in your book, page 7, how do you think something like this would be formed? Do you think Zeus, the Greek god, struck his lightning staff and blew a hole through this? Do you think a human put some dynamite? Or do you think that weathering and erosion caused this, either through water, air, gravity, temperature changes? What do you think? Well, let's scroll down and find out a little bit more. So many natural processes constantly shape and reshape the landforms on Earth's surface. Some of these processes occur very slowly over millions of years. Other processes are very rapid and can occur in minutes. Some of the processes that change landforms are constructive, which means that they build up landforms. Other processes are destructive, which means they destroy landforms. So let's learn about these processes. Weathering. Earth's landforms are composed of materials such as soil, minerals, and rocks. Minerals are solid, non-living, natural occurring substances. Quartz, mica, halite, a rock salt, graphite, and diamond are all minerals. Rocks are composed of one or more minerals. So we can look at this picture, a close-up view of a sand. So we can see the moving water breaks down or weathers rocks and minerals into smaller pieces called sediment. We learned about this in our soils section last quarter. Gravel, sand, silt, and clay are some different sizes of sediment. You got the sand, got this gravel or large rocks. All right, the actions of water, wind, temperature changes, so getting hot or cold, and living things can break down minerals and rocks into smaller pieces in a process which is called weathering. So weathering is occurred when water, wind, temperature changes, or living things break down minerals and rocks into smaller pieces. The smaller pieces of minerals and rocks produced by weathering are called sediment. Because it breaks down rocks and so destroys landforms, weathering is described as a destructive force. You will read more about the cause of weathering in pages 14 through 19. One major type of weathering is called physical weathering. Physical weathering changes the size or shape of rocks, breaking them down by actions such as scraping, pounding, grinding, and splitting. Tree roots, for example, sometimes grow into small cracks in a rock. As the roots grow larger and larger, they widen the cracks and eventually split the rock. And you may have seen this happen with rocks out in nature, but you might have also seen it if you've seen a big tree that's close to the sidewalk or the road, and you might have seen the tree root break up the rock. And here's a picture of that right here, tree roots causing physical weathering when they grow into cracks in a rock. The other main type of weathering is called chemical weathering. Chemical weathering changes the chemical composition or makeup of rocks. It can change minerals and rocks into different minerals. As a result of chemical weathering, rocks crumble and break into sediment. So let's look at this picture right here on the right, and let's read its caption. The orange rust on these rocks is the result of chemical weathering. The rust was produced when iron in the rocks combined with oxygen in the water that flowed over them. That's pretty crazy, but also kind of cool, right? And then learning a little bit more about this chemical weathering. Chemical weathering often occurs when rocks come into contact with water or moist air. Substances in water or air can react or combine chemically with substances in the rock. And then right here is an example of that taking place. Chemical weathering can also occur when rainwater combines with carbon dioxide gas in the air, producing a weak acid. The acid reacts with the minerals in some types of rocks, such as limestone, weakening a rock over many years. This type of chemical weathering can hollow out huge underground caves. And I've been in an underground cave, Not really a fan. I think it's kind of scary, but maybe some of you guys have been to one and like it. Here's a picture of chemical weathering right here. Rocks sometimes have lichens growing on them. Weak acids produced by lichens can cause chemical weathering that breaks down the rocks over time. And then here's your checkpoint. This is your checkpoint for the weathering section. So answer this discussion post, explain what the process of weathering is. Our last section is erosion, starting on page 10. All right, so follow along with me. Sediment produced by weathering often is transported or moved away from the place where it formed. The movement of sediment is called erosion. Like weathering, erosion is a destructive process that is constantly changing Earth's surface. To cause sediment to move, a force such as a push or a pull is required. That force may come from blowing wind or moving water, for example. More force is required to erode larger pieces of sediment than to erode smaller pieces. And we'll read more about this in pages 14 and 16. Sometimes erosion occurs very quickly. A desert windstorm can transport large volumes of sand over great distances in matters of hours. So right here's a picture of that. And here's a picture of water doing quick erosion. All this water rushing and carrying, loose rock and sediment. All right, so when wind or moving water slows down, it drops the sediment it is carrying. The dropping of eroded sediment in a new location is called deposition. Deposition occurs when moving water or wind slows down. This sediment, looking at this picture here on the right, this sediment was eroded when the river was higher and faster. When the river slowed down, it deposited the sand and gravel it was carrying. So when the water was higher and moving faster, it was carrying all this sediment, all this sand, small little gravel pieces right here. And then when the water slowed down and wasn't so high, you can see the analysis right here. And it's probably just slowly moving pieces. Unlike weathering and erosion, which are destructive processes, deposition is a constructive process. It builds up landforms. So this is a constructive process, not a destructive process like weathering and erosion. Sediment that is deposited in a new location may become part of soil. Soil is a mixture of sediment, water, air, and humus. Remember we learned about this in our soil section, and humus has a lot of nutrients in it. It's a very small part or portion or percentage of soil, but it has all the nutrients. Sediment it makes up about 50% of soil, and then water and air both have about 25% each. So humus is the decayed waste and remains of living things, such as plants and animals. Soil formation is an extremely slow process. It takes about 200 years to form 1 centimeter, or 0.4 inches of soil. 200 years to probably get that much soil. But focus on it right there. This is my lens cap, and this is probably even more. This is probably close to a half an inch. But 200 years to make this much soil, pretty crazy. The type and amount of soil that forms an area depends on several factors. One factor that affects soil is the rock types. In the area, different types of rock contain different minerals. Since the sediment in soil is weathered rock, different soils and different kinds and amounts of minerals. A second factor that affects soil is climate, or the average long-term weather conditions in the area. So is the area really hot for a long time? Is it really cold? Is there a mixture of that? That kind of impacts the weather conditions, impacts the kind of soil that is formed. Soils that form in humid climates generally have more humus than soils that form in dry climates. So the soil back in Virginia where I lived had more humus, and that's probably why there was a lot more trees and plants and a lot more green in color, unlike here in Gallup, where it's a lot more just kind of plain and bland because of the soil. It's drier, probably gets hotter and colder. There's not a lot of nutrients in the soil. And then the third factor that affects soil is topography. Steeper areas usually have less soil than areas with gentle slopes. And there's a lot of steep areas around this area, especially us being in the Rocky Mountains. So that has an impact of the soil. All right, so your last 2 assignments for this section. And here's your last checkpoint for your erosion section. So your erosion checkpoint assignment is explain what erosion is and provide an example. And then for this section, you have an apply science concept, which is suppose that a water flows over rocks for many years and slowly breaks them down. Would you say that this is weathering, erosion, or both? And then explain your ideas in the text entry box on Canvas for your assignment. But that will wrap up our first section of weathering erosion. A lot of cool stuff. Maybe next time I'll show you something that has been weathered in my fridge. Okay, well, I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a great day.